Alright, Shalom YouTube. So I will add in the info and what have you eventually, the information to my website and what have you. Now I don't do anything for monetary gain or what have you. So if you want to donate and what have you eventually, by all means. I mean, I don't think even received a dime in regards to anything at this point in time, and like I said, it'll be put to good use if you ever do, but that's not the intent of doing any of this, right? Because I'm not here to benefit for myself. I'm more to enlighten and tell people what the truth is, right? So in regards to what's currently happening with me, last week, basically what happened is, and I'm on my way home currently, I got a notice in the mail and what have you. I think it may have been Monday or what have you that I received the notice, but nevertheless is basically the order, the judge gave me the notification that he was going to do the previous Thursday, that I was going to be put into institutionalized for a period of up to 90 days based on the traffic citations and the obstruction. So I did post the videos, as you can clearly see, and what have you on the website here, what have you, and I'll probably replicate and duplicate and what have you if need be, and what have you. Just that way it's all said and done, all there if need be, the validation of everything. So if they ever do want to try to remove anything or what have you, if that's their intent. But I don't think they're going to progress any further than what they already have, because basically what happened after I received notification last Monday in regards to the letter that they're trying to send to me in the mail that I had to sign off for, which is basically them serving me papers, in other words, for the institutionalization. I wasn't there to sign off, so they didn't leave the papers there. I noticed where it was coming from, which is obviously Buffalo Psychiatric on 400 Forest Avenue, I believe, in Buffalo, what have you, right? So if you watch the videos that I have about the police brutality, all four of them, what have you, validates that I did assert my rights. And in inserting my rights, now keep in mind that the majority don't know what true Christianity is. You'll have Baptists and what have you, they'll proclaim the Ten Commandments, but most people not knowing the full dynamic of the Ten Commandments. The true dynamic of true Christianity is breaking the chains from a secular government. That's why in the videos you'll see that I'm proclaiming openly the complete separation of church and state and everything else. So it's not just what the Baptists do and all of a sudden all these Baptists are going to be doing this and what have you. Hopefully they will, to be honest with you, but they'll stop being just Baptists. They'll all understand the dynamics. That's why the other videos, right? And to validate what Messianic Judaism is, understanding the calendar, understanding the dynamic, because you have to put it in the context that Messianic Jews have been around for quite some time. A lot of people are becoming more and more aware of what the truth is and not listening to what the pastors and priests and everything else are, and rabbis are dictating to them, which is keeping them submissive to what's going on in society. And based on that, that's what's stepping them above. Now, obviously, my dynamic, I was born way back in the 70s, right? So I've been around for some time. A lot of people think that based on my appearance, I'm like in my 30s or so on and so forth. I've had somebody even at one point in time say that, talking smack, so to speak, about 40-year-olds or people that are in their mid-40s. And it's like, you realize that you're talking about my age level, right? So I thought it was kind of hilarious. But nevertheless, I mean, I'm accustomed to it. I mean, when I was 30, people thought I was still going to high school and what have you. So that said, it's a matter of understanding the dynamics. So back in the 90s, you had Ruby Ridge, right? And the Weavers were Messianic Jews, and you had the FBI coming after them for violating court orders and what have you. And they had a warrant on them, so they came and they did a siege on Ruby Ridge. And what he was doing that was illegal in their eyes was something that was Second Amendment activity. That was protected, was he was selling, as far as I'm aware, keep in mind, I haven't, and this is something that I read, he was selling off sawed-off shotguns, right? And because he was selling sawed-off shotguns, they considered that to be illegal, an infringement, which was an infringement on his Second Amendment rights, and he violated the court order and what have you, well, whatever it was with the court. And then he was issued a warrant to go arrest him for not showing up into court. and that eventually led to everything that happened, and a few of the weavers died and what have you, and the government lost millions of dollars. The FBI was lying under oath and everything else, and cover up in that sense and what have you. But I didn't even understand that they're Messianic Jews until more recently, right? Then not long after that, that was like in the early 90s, not long after that you had Waco, right? And that was clearly a First and Second Amendment violation. So that said, within a short period of time, you had two religious groups that got attacked by the government, right? Now you had also during that time the Evans Gate cult and what have you, all these different dynamics. And you also had who was it? David Duke running for president on the Republican ticket, and he was known to be the former leader, Grand Wizard of the KKK, what have you, but people don't understand that historical dynamic either. He was always running on the Democrat ticket until he ran on the Republican ticket, and when he ran on a Republican ticket, he proclaimed himself to be a born-again Christian, and he was no longer racist. So based on his affiliation with the Republican Party, that's why you have a lot of things sway into the mentality these days that, oh, well, it's white supremacy, Christianity is white supremacy, especially if you put it into the dynamic of what happened at Ruby Ridge. They're also trying to utilize the Weavers to infiltrate a Messianic Judaism group that they perceive to be white supremacists. So that was them doing things that they shouldn't have been able to do, right? Because of the free exercise clause of the First Amendment and the Second Amendment, because all people, according to the Second Amendment, are part of the militia. It's not semicolon, blah, and that doesn't apply to anybody that's not part of the militia, because everybody is a part of the militia on the federal level as well as the state level, right? Within the age limits of 18 to 45, and if after you're 45 years old, if you're a former military member, what have you, you can apply to be part of the militia until you're like 65 or something. So that said, and even in New York State Constitution, it basically says all citizens of the state are part of the militia and what have you. So a lot of people don't understand that dynamic, and not understand the dynamic that the state couldn't arm all citizens, couldn't afford to arm all citizens. Just imagine the tax dollars. They left it to, well, we'll have the organized militia, the military in other words, and supply them with arms and everything else, but we'll also have the artillery that could be utilized by the unorganized militia as well, what have you, which is the remainder of the citizens for the defense of the states as well as the United States, and leave it up to the unorganized militia, basically the rest of the citizen population, to arm themselves for that civil defense. So if you go to New York State Civil Rights Code, what have you, I think it's within Section 5 and 6, or maybe 4, 5, and 6 refers to the militia. And basically, if you have a conscientious objection like I would, because I support the full-heartedly that Second Amendment, but at the same time I am a pacifist, so I won't arm myself to that degree to defend anybody, because again, it's a matter of turning the other cheek and doing good to those that harm us and what have you. So that's sad. But if you look in that Civil Rights Code, if you're a conscientious objector, then you actually technically owe the state money. So all these different arguments about gun laws and what have you, you have to put it into that context that they're literally violating the rights of the citizens right in front of everybody, and yet the Democrats are still in some level of authority, despite the literal laws that are in place to ensure that they don't do exactly what they're doing, right? So when it comes to the civil right, they're called unalienable for a reason. It's not anything you can give away or sell or anything else to anybody else. It's something that is given to you and it's yours to keep, right? That said, it means that it's a limitation on the government. So when the Democrats are prominently up against that First and Second Amendment, it's because they don't want to abide by the Constitution, yet they'll slant everything up against the Republicans. Now, keep in mind, I don't agree wholeheartedly on what the Republicans do, but that's why I don't vote or what have you. I haven't voted in over 20 years, probably 23 years now, since the last time I ever voted. And the only time I ever voted was for John Kerry back in the year 2000, which at that time he was part of the Green Party, and I was an environmentalist. I still am to a degree, but not as prominent as like Greta or anything like that, because I understand the slant into it, that it's still a matter of the government trying to control the people, control the resource, have too much control where it shouldn't have control, right? So And that's where I go off on that dynamic. I understand, like pollution-wise and what have you, where companies were over polluting and causing a lot, wreaking havoc on the environment. That's one thing I would go up against, but that's on a corporate level. That's on a business level. That's something that can be regulated by the government, because they're not individual persons, but rather a company that's trying to profit, and in their aspirations for profit are causing harm to the environment, which in turn is impacting the livelihood of the citizens, right? So that is what I would go up against. Now, on the other dynamic, well, this, that, blah, 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 that's a different argument for a different time, but I don't get affiliated with that, because that's, again, I'm complete separation of church and state. I worry more about what I do, right, than anything else. So that said, when it comes to everything in my dynamic, and again, if you watch those videos, you have to keep in mind that's Title 18, Section 242, deprivation of rights under the color of law. So even though the police didn't understand the dynamic, because that, you have to keep in mind, I'm trying to educate too, right? Even in the video I said, well, let me educate you. Listen to what I'm saying. I'm trying to educate you. Oh, you're yelling at me. Yes, sir, I can yell at you, because to have respect to persons is to commit sin. So you can't use psychology or any all the little gameplays that they're taught in their training against a saint, because a saint will rebuke a devil, right? Because if you don't follow those 10 commandments, you're automatically one of the children of Hashatan, and you are a devil. I can rebuke a devil, right? Especially if they're trying to instill a secular mentality on me. So when it comes to the traffic citation, maybe that they're trying to issue, you have to keep in mind that's secular in nature. Now, if it were a situation where I accidentally went through the stop sign and I hit somebody in some capacity or what have you, then I would be causing injury to a person or their property, and or both, and therefore I would hold myself accountable. Now, the other aspect that the majority probably don't realize, and I didn't even realize within this last decade, is if you have an accident with somebody else, you do not need to get the police involved unless there is an injury to the other person or somebody within their vehicle. If somebody is injured physically in that accident, then the police are required to be involved. But if it's just their property, the police don't have to be involved at all, right? So in this case, why are the police involved if there was no accident and I went through a stop sign accidentally, and in process there's no victim and hence no crime? But they escalated a civil infraction to a crime, which is a crime in and of itself. Now, the other aspect with the court, and a lot of people don't understand the dynamic, and I'd recommend that you get a free copy of the Constitution from Hillsdale College. You can find them online as well through the government and what have you. But if you get the one from Hillsdale, at least you'll have a pocket Constitution you can carry around with you, and you can read it and understand it quite thoroughly. But under the 7th Amendment, keep in mind when you go to traffic court for any reason, if it's a minor infraction, then they're going to charge you somewhere around $50, $80, $100 and some odd dollars, whatever the cost happens to be. If it's and especially if there's no victim, there is no crime and what have you situation. The 7th Amendment to the Constitution allows you to have a trial by jury, because even if it's a civil matter under common law, you can have a trial by jury. And if you waive the court in a court of law, and this is something I learned from somebody that's out of North Carolina, Andrea Sultan or something like that, I forget her name. I'll eventually probably post a link to her website and what have you as well, because you can get a lot of information from her that'll benefit you. If you waive the court during a traffic citation, which means that you want a jury trial, typically they'll dismiss that traffic citation based on the fact that it's going to cost them more to get a jury involved to try to assess your guilt in that traffic situation. And therefore, by definition, if you look at the executive code and everything else, they're going to dismiss the case because it's not going to be to their benefit. They're not going to profit off it. It would cost them more money to prosecute you than it would be for them to dismiss the case. So they're going to, generally speaking, dismiss the case, right? So that said, now keep in mind with everything explained as I have, you'd understand the dynamic more clearly in those police brutality videos and where my civil rights were violated. Because again, it's a matter of complete separation of church and state. There are other Messianic Jews in the area. I'm affiliated with the Black Hebrew Israelite Church that is in the Buffalo area, otherwise known as the Apostolic Rock Temple of the Living Elohim. However, as a former parishioner there, so to speak, where I was learning a lot of information about the Ten Commandments, which the majority aren't familiar with, so that me proclaiming myself to be a prophet and everything else, that's something I learned while I was there. That's Ephesians 4:11 and what have you, to where it talks about the fivefold ministry to some pastors, some teachers, some evangelists, some apostles, and some prophets, right? So it's part of the fivefold ministry. So that gets a lot of people worried if you utilize the term prophet and false prophet, which I did in the email. But to the DA, when everything was going on, because she was sent an email saying they're ready for trial and everything else, so she got an email back saying, here we go, let's go, I have immunity in this case, and I was declaring my prophet status and everything else, which obviously would cause an alarm and what have you. I understand that. Look, I don't agree with Waco with how he did things, because David Koresh, you have to understand the branch Davidian, it's in the name, right? They were adulterers, or rather he was. And if they're an adulterer, you shouldn't be leading the congregation because you're in violation of the Ten Commandments. Now, if the Weavers were actually affiliated with the white supremacist group or Wavy, then they would likewise be false prophets, right? Because they're not proclaiming the Ten Commandments, they're more concerned about superficial aspects like skin color, right? So when I was rebuking the other brothers of the church for being in violation of the Ten Commandments and what have you, wanted to openly proclaim to me that only a black man can understand Ten Commandments. That's what made him a false prophet. On top of it, my uncle, which has since passed away, was affiliated with the Seventh-day Adventist Church down in Florida, and he was one telling me through my cousin, which also likewise passed away since then, that about James 2, right? Because they were wanting to have a dress code at the church, and they're very prominent in trying to instill a dress code, which is wearing suits and ties and what have you. So if you looked at James 2, it states quite clearly that, again, it's a matter of having respect to persons, but it's a matter of also favoring people that wear goodly apparel, right? So that's a violation of the royal law per James 2. So that's likewise validation that they were in violation of the Ten Commandments when they're coming after me. So that made the pastor a false prophet. And if you understand the Bible, you're not supposed to be following false prophets. You're supposed to be wary of them, right? So in the email to the DA and I was proclaiming myself to be a prophet, and I was likewise asserting the fact that the Black Hebrew Israelite church that I'm formerly affiliated was false prophets, and which also gives the validation to my situation when it comes to the free exercise clause, right? Because if you were to go to the Yellow Deli out of Hamburg, New York, and what have you, which I think they're called the 12 Tribes or what have you, but they do business as a Yellow Deli and what have you. So me understanding them historically when I was affiliated with the Black Hebrew Israelites, I did understand that on their website itself did proclaim openly that they didn't want black people mixing with white people because they wanted to keep them separate because of the inclination of black people or something like that. I forget how they described it, but that was likewise racism, right? So I understand the dynamic that if you were to look at the dynamics of everything, where Ham is on the bottom of the totem pole, and for the Ham went down to Africa, then Shem went over to Asia and what have you, and then you had Japheth that went over to Europe and what have you. So that understood that I could understand that they don't want to mix with Ham, because Ham was basically cursed above all curses and put as the bottom feeder, so to speak, to where they'll live in the tents of Japheth, and Japheth will live in the tents of Shem, right? And it's from Shem that the actual Israelites come from, and the Ashkenazi Jews come from Japheth's lineage. So that's why they're called, if you look at the lineage of Japheth, it comes from Ashkenazis under his lineage. So there's a lot of Black Hebrew Israelites have justification for going up against the Ashkenazi or otherwise Orthodox Jews, based on the fact that they are disobedient to the Torah, and likewise they're not completely genetically, also hereditarily at least, the original Israelites. So they'll proclaim themselves to be the original Israelites. However, they're still being disobedient to Yahweh. So that's not something that is they're allowed to do. I think it's Deuteronomy 28 where it refers to all the blessings that they'll obtain if they're obedient to Yahweh, but likewise it refers to the curses that will be instilled upon them if they're disobedient to Yahweh, and how they're supposed to be the ones that take fault for their own actions, right? It's their own fault that they're put into diaspora because they're disobedient to Yahweh, and based on that, that's what's going to force them to try to get back to Israel and what have you. And you'll see a lot of them proclaiming on YouTube and what have you that they want to reclaim their land and what have you, and you'll see what's going on with the Arab nation, what have you, trying to take over Palestine or part of Israel. And that's the Ishmaelites, aka Muslims. Ishmael was the uncle to Jacob being renamed Israel, so they're related, right? So the Black Hebrew Israelites understand the connection between them and the Ishmaelites, that they're family, and it's a family argument, a family dispute, and because the Ashkenazi Jews are considered to be off the line of Japheth and Wahabi, and therefore not abiding by the Abrahamic faith as it should be, they're disobedient to the Torah, in other words. That's where the Arab nation, Wahabi, is trying to attack them currently, right? Because people don't understand the true dynamics of history. That's why I again refer to the video where I was talking about the biblical calendar. That'll help give you a little bit more understanding of the dynamic of what's going on over there currently, and likewise in my present situation. Because again, when it came to that wearing of the clothing, Wahabi is a violation of the royal law. You have to keep in mind when it comes to the 10 Commandments, that's completely restrictive. No different than how if you were to put it into the status with the United States Constitution out of the Bill of Rights, the 10 Bill of Rights, the 10 rights, the first 10 amendments, were like no different, extremely similar to the 10 Commandments, right? That's what the whole purpose was, because our country was founded prominently by Protestants as well as Freemasons and what have you. But that's why the First Amendment is about matter of that free exercise and the freedom and the anti-establishment clause of the First Amendment as well. So both of them work in tandem, despite Cornell University saying that they work separate from each other. They actually work in tandem with each other, because if the government is trying to instill a secular mentality on me, they're trying to establish religion with me. Now, if they go up against somebody that's secular, where there is no victim and hence no crime, now what they're trying to do is they're trying to establish religion with them. They're trying to be the parent, right? So that's how it works in tandem. It doesn't work separately from each other. And that's why we have a lot of arguments in modern day when it came to evolution theory and what have you, and trying to teach it with the Scopes trial in school and what have you, because then people start seeing, or at least believing, that there's a disparity between science and religion when there isn't, right? Because science has become a fourth religion, right? So that's the whole purpose of me doing all these videos. Well, I haven't done a lot here, but I'll link out my TikTok, where people can go to the TikTok and they'll see a lot more videos, because that's where I typically post things, right? That's where I'm doing things on a more daily-to-day basis and what have you, versus a periodic video that I'm going to submit to YouTube, right? So YouTube is for the longer videos, for the ones that I don't want to do TikTok after TikTok after TikTok video for. And also I'm going to link it up to my website. That way everything, the most pertinent and relevant videos, whether it's from YouTube or TikTok or what have you, is going to be on my website. That way that's quick and easily accessible, rather than have to sift through all the TikTok videos that I make and what have you, right? So that all said, when it came to Marbury versus Madison, one of the fundamental cases in the United States, maybe if anything's repugnant to the United States Constitution, it's automatically null and void, right? So you go back to the New York State with the laws of the Duke, you go back to the Charter of Privileges and Immunities, you go back to the Magna Carta, the Charter of the Forest, all these different things. You'll see that a lot of the aspects that's consistent is the violation of the rights of the people. When the rights of the people get violated, that's causes alienation, that causes them to want to go up against the very government that should be there to protect them. That's what the purpose of the government is in the United States. We are the kings and queens of, no different than how the monarchy was the king and queen, what have you. We became, when we overthrew the monarchy in the United States, we became the oligarchy of our own version of kings and queens, right? So as long as whatever we do isn't licentious, which is depriving any other citizen of their rights, we're allowed to do it. And that's freedom of exercise, that's freedom from establishment. That's why, like you said, they work in tandem, they don't work against each other. So that said, yet when I was asserting those rights, the 10th Amendment, the First Amendment, the 9th Amendment, with the police, you have to keep in mind that the states get their authority when they came to the Federalist Papers. Read the Federalist Papers in regards to this. I haven't read them all myself, but they will be on my website as well. Actually, they all are on the website with the exception of me going through. I think I've gotten up to the number 26, but I'll post my relevance to all the ones up to the 26, but it's stating the exact same thing, that we live in a republic. And the purpose of us having a republic is to protect the individual rights of the citizens. Because if you're alienating the citizens by violating the rights, then they want to go up against the government. That's going to cause a rebellion against the government, and it's not really a rebellion, no different than if you go back to the Magna Carta and what have you, where it's saying the exact same thing, that if the kings and queens and what have you are doing things that are a violation of the rights of the people, then they gave them full authorization to come after the king and queen, to take their lands, to steal their lands, and do everything that they did. So that same likewise applies in modern society under our United States Constitution. If the government doesn't want to abide by the constitutional standards, they can be overtaken. I think in a constitutional way that it would require about 8 governors, last I knew, somewhere around there. No different than the barons and what have you during the times of the Magna Carta, which again, it's a direct correlation. So if you had 8 Republican governors, in other words, they had decided to utilize their state militias to go up against the federal government because the federal government is being non-compliant with the federal Constitution, that is their right. They can do that, right? So that's the whole aspect of the militia. If the government is becoming AWOL from that Constitution, they can be removed by force by the governors. But you have to keep in mind that likewise, if the Democrat governors perceive the same things and look at everything that's going on in America, where they're openly and blatantly violating constitutional standards, then what we're looking at is a civil war in that aspect. That's why everything is playing out as it is, because there are a lot of things that are going on in America that shouldn't be going on, but what I think they're really trying to prevent is a civil war, and likewise a world war, right, with everything that's going on. Now, keep in mind, when it comes to anything that's in violation of the Constitution, is automatically null and void. Any law that it would include traffic laws in my situation, and I believe it is equally generally applied to everybody, right? If you violate a traffic law or what have you, because it's not a law, if it's violating your rights, it's utilized to deprive you of your rights, which they are if they're charging you civilly for a civil infraction or what have you, when there is no victim. Society can't be a victim because they'd have to produce society, right? And you're a part of that society. They're utilizing conjecture to violate your rights, right? So I understand needing a license and everything else, having the fundamental principles. And then you have too many people that, like, say for instance, you're becoming a little bit too elderly and you're getting into too many accidents and everything else, causing a lot of problems, then you might not want to be somebody in a position that's driving around. It would be for the safety that's rational, right, in that context. But then there's an irrational application where it's not somebody that's just a new driver that doesn't understand the fundamentals of the rules of the road and what have you. Needs that level of correction to get them in line to abide by some level of a standard. That way they're not causing accidents. But in my situation, that is being somebody that's 45 years old, accidentally going through a stop sign once out of how many years or something like that, but typically follow the protocol and the general application principle, especially when it comes to it violating my right. Yeah, that's no bueno, right? So to put it in a biblical perspective with everything I said with the Black Hebrew Israelites and that dress code, and he did like no different than how anything that if it's a violation of the constitutional standard, it's automatically null and void. Same applies to those 10 commandments. If it's a violation, if it's not against Yahweh and his commandments, then it's automatically null and void, because he's the supreme law of the land. He's the one that created everything, right? So to acknowledge that secular mentality that what I did was unsafe, even though there is no victim and therefore no crime, would be blasphemy in a biblical sense, because it's making them act like they're deities, right? and respecting their authority. And you have to keep in mind, under the 10th Amendment states whatever is not on the federal level, my rights are secured under the First Amendment under the federal level, so my rights are there regardless of whatever the state Bill of Rights and what have you are. Then my right is right there. If Congress can't prohibit the free exercise directly or indirectly, then the judicial nor the executive branch can enforce that law, right? So regardless of whatever the opinions are and whatever everybody's comments are and what have you, which I'm not acknowledging, because I understand that I saw a little bit of a Democrat's twist in one of the comments, and ever since I haven't really watched it, because looked at the comments anyway, because I know that I'm going to deal with a lot of people that are going to, oh, it's misinformation and everything else, make all those comments. I saw a few of those. So that said, I'm not going to be suckered into that, right? Because what they're trying to do is they're trying to get me to make a comment that they can report and therefore get the video banned or what have you, because that's what their objective is, right? So that said, I'm not going to play into that game. I'm just going to post the videos. I'm going to give all the information. If you want to send an email, you can go to my website when I posted the link out to it and what have you in the information. So you can go to the website, you can submit a what is it? I forget what their form, basically, which will go to my email, or well, actually, I can access it all from the website itself. When I go to the website information, I can go to everything I can see if you submit anything, right? So that said, I don't, and then if I can respond if necessary. So if you have anything legitimate, then do it that way, because chances aren't likely that I'm going to watch the comments, because again, I know how the game is played. That's why my TikTok, I prevented people from commenting at all for until recently, because I know how the game is played. I know what they're trying to do. They're trying to provoke people into making a stupid statement that they're going to utilize to ban people, right? From the platform or the video or what have you. So I don't play into that game. So again, going back to everything with the Ten Commandments, again, it's repugnant. It's a matter of, if you're to put it into biblical context, again, go back to Deuteronomy 28. It's a matter of strict adherence, right, of those Ten Commandments. So blasphemy, it's a matter of, it's a no bueno. And the state gets their authority under the 10th Amendment. My rights are secured under the federal level. On the state level, especially given the fact that they try to proclaim that I'm incompetent, right, to defend myself based on utilizing conjecture from two forensic psychiatrists, you have to keep in mind that that's a violation of the Constitution under Article 1, Section 3, where it refers to the free exercise, and that nobody can be deemed incompetent when it comes to expressing their beliefs, right? So that is a violation of that constitutional standard in itself. That's my right under the New York State Constitution, right? So if you're arguing in a court and what have you, make sure you're familiar with the New York, whatever state you're in, your state's constitution, your state's Bill of Rights, and your state's civil rights codes and what have you, to make sure that they're not infringing on the rights in that sense. Because if they're violating the rights, there is not their right to do that in any capacity, whether it's a judge, whether it's a police officer, whether it's a public health official like the forensic psychiatrist and what have you, when they're trying to institutionalize me, and hence the email, which will eventually go up to my website, which was why I probably haven't received a response from them since. And I basically demanded that the vacate the court order and an email to the court clerk immediately following when the case was dismissed and waived. And they told me everything as soon as I left the courtroom, and I read the court order. Part of the 730 psych eval, since I was defending myself pro se, is the very fact that since I was defending myself pro se, they have to provide me with the evaluation forms from the psychiatrists. That way I can cross-examine the psychiatrists, and also on the court order itself states quite clearly that not only did they provide me that paperwork, which is inaccurate, they never did, and so there was a request for that paperwork and waiving the fact that I was going to escalate to the New York State Supreme Court. But also part of the procedure is they said that I didn't file a motion for a hearing. How can I file a motion for a hearing if they didn't give me the paperwork for the evaluation? So I can file a motion for the hearing so I can cross-examine, put them on my witness list, And with them being on my witness list, I would have that opportunity to browbeat them, because now they're not just the government witness, they are my personal witness, and I can ask them anything under the sun. The prosecutor couldn't object based on foundation, because if you put the government witnesses, such as the police and what have you, on your own witness list, you can ask them anything you want, right? And the prosecution can't argue with you and object on the basis of foundation, which is basically the paperwork, because now they're open to any question because they're on your witness list, right? And you can ask them anything. So that said, that was a further violation of due process, because if you watch those videos, it was a violation of due process. Now, the aspects when it comes to the civil rights aspect, beyond just to have respect to persons to commit sin, and likewise, I forget what the other aspect is that I mentioned earlier, but rebuking devils and what have you, and trying to instill a secular mentality. The other aspect of the First Amendment that I was asserting is my Christian name, right? Obadiah, which is the name within this channel. Now, in Hebrew, that translates to servant of Yah, right? So by asserting that name, I was going to assert the other aspects of to have respect to persons to commit sin. How does this apply to a traffic law? Well, you're violating my rights. That's blasphemy, right? That's the other aspect they weren't acknowledging, because they wanted to put me into the dynamic of the sovereign citizens, and I agree with the sovereign citizens in a lot of situations, because if there is no victim, there is no crime, and the government has been too heavily involved in the affairs of the citizens, and the government needs to take a step back, because they're there to protect our rights, not to take away from our rights, right? That's why we have these rights that are unalienable, right? Can't be taken away from us, right? So the other aspect, and that's where I was referring to the common law, right, under the 9th Amendment. So under the Civil Rights Code in New York State, under 64A, that subdivision 4, it refers to the common law right of every person, regardless whether it's single or married or what have you, and that's referring to how the government issued IDs. In other words, that's referring to that aspect. So without it being put on a government issue ID, every person has the right to change their name under common law to whatever they prefer, as long as they're using it consistently and without intent to defraud, right? And that's my Christian name. No different than like Muhammad Ali Cassius Clay became Muhammad Ali, the Pope renamed to John Paul, and all these different Mother Teresa and everything else, all these different names for all these different religions. So that's my right, and I don't have to put it on my license. So that's why when it came to the interaction, I was asserting that very principle, because I understood what the law was, right? I understood case law. And case law, you have to have bare minimum provide them with your name as well as your date of birth. I did them one better. I gave them my name as well as my driver's license number, right? Because I understood that they're trying to push for an obstruction charge to make me asserting my right turn it into a crime and failure to identify. So I did identify that's why the initial video has the 911 call, as well as probably some of the other ones. I haven't watched them myself, where I made a call to 911, provided my full legal name as it's on my driver's license, as well as my driver's license number, which means that when they cited me for failure to identify and arrested me, that was a false arrest, right? That was a violation of my rights, which they cited Penal Code 195.05, right? Obstruction of an administrative action and what have you, but they're in violation of Penal Code 195.00, which is official misconduct, depriving a citizen of a benefit that they're entitled to, which is a constitutional right and what have you. Under the context of law, if you were to put it on the federal level, that's Title 18, Section 242, deprivation of rights under the color of law, which would likewise apply to the psych evals, right? Because they're utilizing conjecture in the context of the law, the criminal procedure. Now, keep in mind that with what I just told you, that mitigates the false arrest, the criminal action against me of obstruction, because they didn't have just cause, they didn't have probable cause. Without probable cause, they can't arrest you. and they can't arrest you for going through a stop sign, right? Because that's a civil infraction at best. If there's no victim, there is no crime, and they would also, for it to be a crime, there has to be intent. So it was done unintentionally, therefore it can't be a crime, and it couldn't be criminal negligence, right? Because there has to be a victim for it to be a crime. So it's not a class whatever misdemeanor or anything like that. It's a civil infraction, right? That's what it is. So they escalated it to a crime and then arrested me, which is deprivation of rights under the color of law, right? Because that's criminal, regardless of whatever their perceptions is. That's them violating that right. And considering I was arrested in process, that's kidnapping. So if you go back to Title 18, Section 242, if it includes kidnapping or attempted kidnapping, right, that could get them life imprisonment or even the death penalty. That's how serious it is. That's why traffic infractions are very small when it comes in comparison to civil rights, and that's the purpose, right? So that's why I'm doing this video, to reiterate the facts so people understand the dynamics of the videos a little bit more clearly, right? Because for people that aren't aware of what's going on, especially on the global level, look at what's going on with Hamas and Israel and what have you, I have a little bit more familiarity. And we as Messianic Jews, the various ones, dynamics throughout the world, we're the ones that are here to defend the country better than anybody else. Because if you're arguing against our religious freedom, you have to keep in mind you're arguing against the defense of the nation. It is a matter of national security. So when I sent the DA the email and I was proclaiming these different groups to be false prophets, and then I'm a prophet and what have you, basically I'm just a part of the ministry is what I was proclaiming in the email. She wanted to do a psych eval based on that because she didn't think I understood the law, and she was condescending me on top of it. I don't even think he knows what time of day it is or where he is and blah blah blah. That's harassment. That's a hate crime right there in the court of law. She did it under the context that I was doing it because I proclaim myself to be a prophet, and even the state has no authority to argue against it. Whether I'm right or wrong, that is my belief, and the state cannot tell me what to think or believe, right? So utilizing a psych eval, which is implementing secular control over the church, that's a hate crime, right? That's attempted kidnapping. So that becomes her, likewise, potentially getting life in prison for what she did, because that's a capital offense. That's treason, right? So now you put in the other contexts with, if you're to go just one previous to Title 18, Section 242, you go to Title 18, Section 241. That's a conspiracy against rights. So when it came to the psych evals, that I promised that I would go. I wasn't under any obligation to go, and I did cite that it was unconstitutional. I did cite that when she wanted to have me remanded for the psych evals, which is attempted kidnapping, like I was saying, that's likewise unconstitutional. That's discrimination under Article 1, Section 3, which isn't allowed in the United States. That's a violation of the law. She's not following the guidelines, right? So that's discrimination. That's a hate crime, right? So the judge said that he is obligated to remand me, but he didn't want to do it, right? But he wasn't legally obligated at all, because again, it includes judges under Title 18, Section 242, right? And same with anybody else that's working in their official capacity under Title 18, Section 241. So now that there's two parties, the prosecution as well as the judge, that wanted to remand me under the color of law, in other words, when I was asserting my rights, that's a conspiracy against rights, right? So they're adding to it, and they're worried about what small minor traffic infraction, yet they are in a court of law violating the law openly and blatantly, right? So that's why I believe in a lot of what the sovereign citizens are doing, because I understand now more thoroughly than ever that they aren't abiding by the law, right? And I've had this argument when it comes to traffic court for quite some time, based on the fact that it just didn't seem right? First time I went to trial for traffic citation was based on the fact that I did actually accidentally hit a police officer's vehicle, and in process I was issued a citation. Now that made me question it, because I hit the police officer's vehicle on the left hand side, and it was just a small brush up, and it was a similar situation where the sun was in my eyes, and with the sun being in my eyes, I didn't measure the proximity accurately, and I brushed up against the police officer's car. It was small. It was at the end of the driveway of the apartment complex, and maybe probably wasn't in a good position. And me trying to get around him, I accidentally misgauged, and it was a newer vehicle too. Seating was a little bit low, so I didn't have, and with it being SUV style, I didn't gauge everything accurately, is what it was, right? So I accidentally brushed up against him. But I was cited with a pass on right, and if I were, since the vehicle was here, the police officer, I was over here, the right is on over here, right? And over here from the police vehicle is a lot of brush and woods and wavy, so there's no possibility for me to attempt to pass him on the right. So pass on right is like if you're passing somebody on the road and you're not using the yellow dotted line to do it. If you're using the road in the country and area, you can do it more prominently than anywhere else. But you have the white line, and that past the white line, you have a certain level of area. So you can pass somebody on the right in that dynamic too, without you can go past the solid white line if you need to pass somebody, in other words. But if you fail to do so without, if you cause injury or what have you in process, or damage or whatever, that's what the pass on right would be. So I did technically apply, because I did read the code after the fact and what have you, after the court case, after the trial. But I asserted my First Amendment immunity, and I cited the same thing. But I likewise, since it was the first time I ever went to trial, I didn't know that I had to put the police officer as my witness and everything else, so I could ask him questions or anything like that, or I didn't know how things worked in the court, and it was a civil court, and I also didn't understand why I didn't have the right to a jury, so it basically put me in a position where I felt alienated against and discriminated against, and it made me do my research a little bit more thoroughly. But I wasn't able to do a lot of research, and I didn't know where to look, right? But I still felt alienated. So then the same court, well, this was in my court, right next door where I live, is not even a mile down the road is the courthouse. So that's where that first incident occurred, right? So now the second incident was likewise in the city of North Tonawanda, where I was driving around in a rental vehicle, and I saw the police officer's car and what have you, and we came to a four-way stop. He was stopped first. I did a rolling stop. I actually did technically stop for a very brief moment, but I understand most of the time in the area that the police will wave you on at a four-way stop, wave you. So I just did virtually a rolling stop, right? And I went on anyway, because I didn't want to waste time and all the cordial formalities of everything. And then he pulled me over, right? He didn't issue me a citation for the stop sign, and I understood what I did, so I never refused giving him my identity or anything like that, right? Because I wasn't in that dynamic of the fully asserting the First Amendment aspect of everything. So it's like, whatever. Here we go, give him my ID and what have you. He said he wasn't going to cite me for the traffic sign, for the stop sign in other words, but he had to cite me for the vehicle itself, which again was a rental vehicle, and I just recently rented it, because the inspection sticker on the rental vehicle was past due, despite the fact that the inspection sticker on the rental vehicle itself, with the tags being in New York, like the one I'm renting right now and driving around, its tags are out of California, so it doesn't have an inspection sticker on it, right? I can get away with that because the tags aren't in New York State, and I'm in New York State. But this particular rental vehicle was tagged in New York State, therefore it needed to be inspected. But the inspection sticker that was on it was still valid for a few months, yet the police officer said in his system that it was past due for a few months. Now, knowing how things work, is it a possibility that it wasn't inspected properly? It's a possibility with the rental company and what have you. But at the same time, it's not my argument, but even the police officer stated clearly that it's not my obligation to take it up with the rental company, right? So they have them take care of it. So it's like, all right, well, whatever. So I called the rental company, I sent her an email and what have you. They said they'd look into it and what have you. Never heard back from them afterwards. And I've been renting with the rental company for almost 2 years now, probably a little bit more at this point, right? So they had said it inconsistently, almost consistently. There's a small period of time where I wasn't because I was going through a different rental company, what have you. But it's a matter of my vehicle was sold out and what have you during a flood in North Buffalo, and based on that, it's just easier for me to rent a vehicle than it is to go and buy a vehicle, especially considering the prices of vehicles. Even a used vehicle that had like 200,000 miles on it, and it looked like a piece of shit, they're trying to sell for $8,000 on all these different marketplaces and what have you. And it's like, I don't have that kind of cash, especially to put it into a ship box that's not going to get me that far, right? So that said, it's like, you know what, I'll just rent a vehicle and what have you, do everything that I need to with a rental vehicle, right? So that's where that all comes into play. So it's like, that's what they didn't understand. So when I went to court and what have you, because I did plead not guilty on the ticket, and I didn't even get notification of anything until 6 months later, right? So like in October or November of last year, I got notification about a plea offer for the case, and I didn't even understand what the hell was going on. It's like, what's this even about? Because what happened was about 6 months ago. So I contacted the court clerk via telephone. I said, as well, it's not written in the ticket about the police officer saying it's the responsibility of the rental company or anything like that. So I was all right, well, whatever. And she gave me the number for the attorney. And I tried to call the attorney, and they basically put me into voicemail immediately. I heard them pick up, and then they just threw me into voicemail. So, all right, so I left a voicemail with the case number and everything like that, giving the details that it's a rental vehicle and blah, blah, blah. Yakety smackety, and that I wasn't going to accept the plea offer or anything like that. And that it's not my responsibility and everything. In a rational tone way. I mean, I thought he would just understand and just kind of let it go, right? Nope. Didn't show up to the court case and what have you. Because he said, well, if this doesn't happen, then we'll send you a trial date, right? So I didn't respond to the plea offer and waive. And like I said, I left the voicemail. Then I get a second plea offer in the mail. It's like, all right, so I email over to the clerk this time around, because it's like, you know what, I'm not going to do with everything on the phone. I'm going to have it documented and what have you. Send over the email and what have you. Let her know the situation, what have you, blah, blah, blah. She in turn told me that I had to contact I did have to show up regardless to court. So it's like, all right, well, I'm not taking the plea offer. It did give me a trial date and what have you. So I thought I was going to show up to court for trial, right? Nope. Wasn't a trial at all. He basically offered me a plea offer again, which I declined, and I cited and I was watching what was going on with the other ones. I made a motion to dismiss the case based on the fact that First Amendment immunity, like I did in Leroy here, and what have you. And secondly, a second motion to dismiss based on the fact that I'm not obligated to inspect a rental vehicle that's already inspected. And that's when the part-time Judge Luke Brown of the city of North Tonawanda, wanted to claim that it is my responsibility to inspect a rental vehicle. Which in turn, I responded with, if you want to violate my constitutional right, you can be removed from your position. Because again, judges are accountable to the constitutional standards no different than anybody else. So that said, with everything that occurred, it's like, you know what, I'm asserting my rights. There's no justification, especially given everything that happened historically. It's like, you know what, I'm not playing it this time around. So I threatened him technically in a court of law, and then they gave me a trial date. Right, the actual trial date. So I showed up to the trial date. It was the full-time judge, Sean, which is the one that was in charge of this particular case, and the case got dismissed. He cited, I could have swore I heard him say title something about 53331, which is, if you were to look at the Title 5, Section 3331, that's the oath of office for federal employees and what have you, to protect and defend the Constitution, what have you. But I think now, thinking back on it, it was something about 30 something, blah, 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 something like that. But I don't have a record of it, so I don't know what he said. Either way, the police officer wasn't there in court. And based on that, the Sean dismissed the case, right? So it's like, all right, well, thank you, I'm out of here. A few months later, I get pulled over again, this time based on that prior interaction, because they alienated the hell out of me that he wanted to assert that, and I was wasting a lot of time with the court. It's like, all right, so I got my free copy of the Constitution from Hillsdale College, read through the United States Constitution thoroughly. I didn't see anything in there in regards to public health and safety, or anything that in there that would give the government, on a federal level at least, the authority to mitigate my rights under public health and safety, right? So I'm like, well, if it's not on the federal level, and believe it or not, that's how ignorant I was. I didn't understand that we did have a constitution under New York State and what have you. So I wasn't familiar with that as much, right? But nevertheless, I did understand at least the dynamics of the First Amendment, which is my right, which is something I asserted in other places of employment, being a Messianic Jew for a multitude of years, where I was discriminated in places of employment and what have you, because they didn't want me to take off during the holy days and what have you, even though the company had more than enough time, because I gave them well enough time in advance to know what days I needed off, months in advance notice. They still wanted to utilize, well, if it causes undue hardship on the company, we don't have to, but I took the days off anyway, right? And then they want to come after me for it. So that said, I've been heavily discriminated against for a multitude of times. That was included in the email, right, to the DA, when everything I was citing my profit status and everything else, and citing in the place of employment where I was discriminated against. They wanted to prohibit me from doing the holy days and everything else, but instead of acknowledging that and being rational, 730 psychoval. So it's all right. That's, again, conspiracy against rights. So when she did that, not only was she in violation of Title 18, Section 242 with the judge, and when he would likewise being in violation, but it's likewise when they conspired against me. That's Title 18, Section 241, which likewise applies to the psychiatrist, because in both dynamics, first evaluation, I cited Title 18, Section 242 with him in way of a Messianic Jew, asked him about his familiarity, didn't get really a response out of him, what have you. Said it's a matter of restricted adherence to the Ten Commandments and nothing but, and what have you, blah, blah, blah. And then he went on, and then I validated, he was asking his questions, what have you. Then I validated that I did identify myself in a 911 call and what have you. And they said, well, going through a stop sign is still criminal. I was like, no, it's not. I looked it up and what have you. It's not criminal, right? So he had no just grounds and what have you. And he asked a lot of questions that he shouldn't be, which is, it's a violation of my rights. It's a violation of due process and self-incrimination at this point, too. On top of them violating my rights, they're violating the 14th Amendment, which, again, go back to those videos. 14th Amendment is a matter of equal protection, not general application of the law. It's equal protection of the law, right? So, which means that if a law is made that violates my rights, it's automatically null and void, because it's equal protection, not general application, right? So that's why I cited on the 911 call that it's insurrection, which is under the 14th Amendment, right? Because that's what it is. It's an insurrection against the people. Because on the 10th Amendment, it states whatever is on the federal level goes to the state or the people, not exclusively the state. So they'll say that, oh, we're a city of North Tonawanda, and it doesn't make a difference. They're within the state, within jurisdiction of the state, and when the state's within jurisdiction of the United States, therefore, my rights under the federal law and what have you can't be taken away from me. That's the whole point of the Federalist Papers and what have you, if you read up on the Federalist Papers, is ensuring that the rights of the people supersede the authority of all the states. The states gave up their sovereignty in favor of the United States Constitution. We stepped away from having the Articles of Confederacy, in other words, to where each state was defending themselves against anything and everything else in all the different states, to the United States for the defense of the country, right? That's why they don't want to alienate the rights of the people, right? So all that said, my rights, even on the federal level, can't be violated, but now, after the fact, after everything that occurred, now it made me find out about the New York State Constitution and everything else, because I was doing all my research and everything else. Posted a video about it and what have you on TikTok, getting a lot of more affiliation with the sovereign citizens and all this different dynamic, and I was provided with a lot of other things about that, about the USC codes and everything else. So I created in that email to the DA, assistant DA, was an email attachment, a Word document that literally was maybe 20 more pages long of the legal precedents of everything I did under the United States Constitution, Article 6, Section 2, where it's the supreme law of the land. So anything that's repugnant to it, even the New York State Constitution, if there's anything repugnant to the United States Constitution, it's still automatically null and void. It's a violation of the United States laws, our rights, the deprivation of rights under the color of law, right? So, and conspiracy against rights, right? So that said, they can't do that, right? But again, she didn't probably open the attachment, didn't see the legal precedents. They had everything else, but I didn't have the case law. I was at the time arguing against sovereign citizens to a degree that I don't need, and the state nationals, that I don't need to know everything that they know because it's pointless. I'm immune, right? Under the First Amendment, if Congress can't pass a law that prohibits the free exercise directly or indirectly, then the executive nor the judicial branch can enforce that law. That's just common sense. That's American jurisprudence under unconstitutional acts. There's no obligation for the judge, police, or what have you, nor is it my obligation to abide by the unconstitutional act if it violates my rights, right? So that said, I knew that basic principle, and that was in the documentation, American jurisprudence on constitutional acts and everything else, but she wanted to persist with it, and he doesn't want to follow our laws. Laws of New York State are statutes and ordinances and what have you. So even if it's on a state level, if it violates your rights, it's automatically null and void, right? So regardless whatever anybody else believes, doesn't make a difference. It's my right to assert my right. And if you go to case law and what have you, then you would understand that they can't convert a right into a crime. Because again, it's unalienable, right? So regardless whatever their belief is, and I understand a lot of different dynamics, when it comes to things, in my particular position, I have immunity, which was also cited to the assistant DA, which is why she threw a tantrum about it, blah, 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 because she wanted to prosecute, right? So I told him, well, when the judge said he wasn't going to remand me away, everybody asked me whether or not I would go to the psych evals. I'm like, all right, well, whatever. I had to make that promise because it's coercion, right? Because if I didn't, then he would, one, remand me, and I didn't want to be remanded, which is kidnapping, and I could have fought it on that level, but I didn't want to deal with the hassle. So I was being coerced into compliance. So I was forced to promise, in other words. And likewise, to take default judgment on the case would mean that my license would get revoked and all these different dynamics, and that would Class A misdemeanor, which would mean over a year in prison and everything else. So it's like, you know what, I'm asserting my right, and what have you. I don't see any justification for anything that they're doing. But even during the time frame, before I even went to court it took them like about a month and a week or so before I actually showed up to court for the first time for the appearance. One, I wasn't brought before a magistrate. One, I was arrested in what have you, which is illegal. I was fingerprinted. I was photographed and asked a lot of questions. My Miranda rights weren't told to me, right? So everything that's taken after the fact, that technically could be inadmissible in a court of law. But I knew what my rights were. I knew what, and that's why I paused and sat there with my feet in the outside of the vehicle to wait for them to read me my Miranda rights because they're arresting me. They never did. Gave them the opportunity. They didn't do it, right? So they're violating due process of law this whole time. They weren't supposed to even be able to legally arrest me. Even if it was a Class A misdemeanor, they shouldn't be arresting me. That's also, under case law, criminal activity. They can't do that. It's a misdemeanor, even if they witness it, right? Especially if you put into the aspect that I was trying to assert my common law, aka Christian name, which you're not going to find on the license, and therefore my rights under the First Amendment, free exercise, the rebuking of the devil, no respect to persons, and everything else, complete separation of church and state, which is something I cited in the videos, and other dynamics. So it's just it was completely false arrest, and I did provide my full legal name as well as driver's license. So that said, that's where the civil rights were being violated, right? And that's where they're going wrong completely in that dynamic. So that said, That's why when they push me in, they're talking about my mental health history and everything else with the second psych eval, because the first I asserted the fact that I did provide my full legal name as well as my driver's license. So that mitigates the criminal procedure in this case with the psych eval, because psych evals come under criminal procedure, right? It has to be a crime for criminal procedure like that to and move forward, right? So he shouldn't be moving forward after I verified that this wasn't a crime, therefore you shouldn't be going through criminal procedure. And also Title 18, Section 242, deprivation of rights. So I was on legal footing. It should have been gone at that point in time. But no, send me the second psych eval and what have you. Where I asserted, and this one was a little bit longer, the fact that I was just trying to assert my common law, aka Christian name, which means I didn't have intent to not identify, right? So with that said, if you watch the videos, I don't believe at any point in time they asked me for my name. They're demanding my driver's license number, my driver's license the entire time. And they're making other commands like Pennsylvania versus Mims to try to get me out of the vehicle so they could violate my Fourth Amendment rights, right? And that was where I cited back Marbury versus Madison on anything that's automatic, that goes up against constitutional standard. The Fourth Amendment, in other words, is automatically null and void because my rights supersede their authority. But I'm the one that's being irrational, right? And they're trying to use psychology on me, and it didn't work, right? So that said, I did go into my mental health history to where I'll just post the email. It'll be easier on my website. That way you can read out everything, because it's not anything I hide or anything like that. You can go to my TikTok also, to where I posted a lot of videos in accordance to give everybody that information, because I don't have anything to hide when it came to my mental health history, because I did have complications historically, but it wasn't anything that I thought it was. And if I were to put it in a context now, it was more a matter of bad diet and PTSD based on circumstances revolving around 9/11, because I was in my 20s during 9/11. I was working at the time wave, and that caused complications, especially if you put it into the dynamics of Ruby Ridge and Waco, and understanding that the Bush was trying to push it through the Patriot Act, and whatever the Patriot Act entailed, allowing people, citizens even, to be detained illegally and put into Guantanamo, right? Just pluck you out and what have you. Doesn't make a difference if they declare you to be a terrorist and deprive you of your rights and what have you. So I was very prominent against that. That caused its own anxiety levels. So, and also understanding everything on a engineering level, things just didn't seem right when it came to 9/11 at all. And then not even a month later, a friend of mine and my ex-girlfriend's died in a rollover car accident, which caused its own complications. With that caused a lot of trauma in a sense. Then put into the dynamic that my ex-girlfriend wasn't really there for me, and in fact coming up against me, because she was attracted to him because he's a very intelligent individual, but at the same time he was not with me on my dynamic, right? So he was doing things that were wrong. So I was legitimately, because he was up against me for being a Christian at the time, and he thought he was very mathematically inclined. But at the same time, he was not understanding what I understood. So when I was calling him an idiot and what have you to my ex-girlfriend and what have you, it was me legitimately saying that he was an idiot, because he was, right? So she thought I was competing with him when I wasn't. And because she thought he was more intelligent than I was, and she was prominent in believing in evolution theory. And I'll post the videos. I have them on my TikTok and my video where I debunk evolution theory and the Big Bang Theory. Oh, I actually have one on here on YouTube too that goes through that. But that said, it's like, no, it's just science of similarities is what it is. So there's a lot of complications between her and I based on that, which made me, in my eyes, very incompatible, because I thought she was in line with me. At the time, I was proclaiming organized religion to be like organized crime, because I understood that people weren't following what was written in the Bible. They were following their own vain traditions and doing their own thing, right? Especially the teachers, pastors, and what have you. So that's why I called it that. And that's what put her in a dynamic that she was attracted to me, because she thought I believed in evolution theory when I was actually prominently against evolution theory, because I understood that it didn't have any scientific basis to it, right? On a scientific level, on a mathematical level, I understood a lot more when it came to the relationship too, with her mentality and way to where it's like, yeah, this is a no bueno situation. Then eventually, a few months after our friend died, and there's a lot of complications between her and I with that friend, because she was constantly sneaking around, talking to him behind my back. He would in turn come after me and blah, blah, blah. A lot of complications with that. He was getting involved in the relationship when he shouldn't have been. And she was, again, attracted to him, not physically, but mentally, right? And his love of Star Trek, which I love Star Trek in that too, but I can differentiate fact from fiction, right? I understood that it was science fiction. So, especially when I went to college for engineering wave, and you learn about particle physics and the speed of light and nothing can go faster and everything else, it's like, yeah, that's just common sense, right? So Star Trek is just fiction and what have you. As much as I liked it and I loved the idea of being able to travel through space beyond warp speed and doing all these different things, I began to understand it's just science fiction and it'll never be a scientific reality, right? Especially with the speed of light limitation. So that said, it's like, all right, so there's that complication. Then she ultimately dumped me, so to speak, but I was also likewise, because of our varying ideals, which were very conflicting with each other, I was pushing her to that dynamic, especially after her friend died and what have you. I was in a depression that I couldn't get myself out of, so I pushed her away from me because I wanted her to be happy, right? That was the thing. And I knew that she was blaming me for a lot of things that occurred with and not being able to see him as much and what have you based on those complications. So based on that, that caused a lot of depression and what have you. And I did push her away. We watched the movie Beautiful Mind about John Nash and what have you. And I was, again, very mathematically inclined. Our friend would consider himself to be the math man and what have you. So that said, it caused a lot of complications. And John Nash, obviously, having his mental defects and what have you that he was able to overcome and what have you. And the whole concept of foundation of our relationship is people being able to overcome the obstacles. Like, look at everything with the African slavery and everything else, them being able to overcome everything like that. So we meshed a lot in a lot of mental dynamics, but there's also dynamics that were just completely incompatible. So she eventually dumped me for a chemical engineer named John that was Hispanic and what have you, which correlates with her love of Cheech and Chong and everything else. A lot of various dynamics in that. And he was also bald and what have you. And she was very anti-hair kind of person, what have you. So either way, that caused its own complications, bled throughout my life for a little bit and what have you. And that was the dynamic. I assessed myself as being bipolar when the reality was I was suffering from PTSD and what have you. Put on lithium, caused its own complications after a while. Issue in Florida with a relative, what have you. I wasn't acting the way I should have and what have you. Not anything bad on my dynamic, but me being sedated, so to speak, to where I wasn't reacting the way I would have if I wasn't sedated. Went off the medication, off the lithium, cold turkey, caused its own complications, problems at work that weren't derived from any mental illness, way of it. It's based on the circumstance at work when I was hired on full time, so they're trying to fire me legitimately, which led to anxiety issues and what have you. Again, you can watch my TikTok for more clarification. I'll post the videos on my website and what have you too, where I go into detail. But either way, with the absence of the medication, time frame 10/17, which is when the friend died and what have you, that depression, anxiety, depression, based on them trying to fire me during this time frame, based on the fact that the company slowed down during that time of year, and they're always, for the last 5 years, trying to get me fired during this time frame because that was their opportunity to replace me with somebody else, which ultimately led me to send out an email to the Department of Labor, as well as family, as well as one of the managers, which ultimately got me institutionalized briefly for 2 weeks. They did their own little evaluation and what have you, found that I was completely normal, didn't have anything on me and what have you. My admiration of John Nash and what have you put me into the dynamic that I was, and especially with the anxiety and paranoia from the work environment, right? I had a sociologist and what have you that was dealing with that. I had the psychiatrist that was giving me the lithium. They understood the dynamic of the history with the work, and my family correlated everything. So it was all substantiated and documented that this was going on. It wasn't something that was just in my head, right? But the company was trying to scapegoat me for something that didn't occur and what have you. And I was going to get a lawyer, which blah, blah, blah. Just watch the TikTok. It'll clarify that. But either way, I pushed for Risperdal, pushed for the dynamic that I was paranoid schizophrenic. They put me on Risperdal. Risperdal was a stabilizer that I needed because I was, again, without the lithium. And that's what eventually I became stable. My coping mechanisms came back and wavy, and I've been fine ever since. And that was over 15 years ago. So I'm trying to utilize that as what for rationalize what everything that occurred during the police interaction. That's a no bueno situation because I had no impact on how everything was going because, again, I'm very meticulous, right? And if you saw there, I think I smiled a few times in there, and especially in when they arrested me and everything else, I was laughing and I was joking around to a degree, telling them to taser me and everything else. Because believe it or not, that's probably a little bit crazy for me to say, but I do want to. I worked on a dairy farm growing up in what have you for a few years, and I got zapped by the electric fence, so I know that it's not a good thing. But ever since watching what is that movie? The one about them going to Vegas and what have you. You know, some people will probably remember it and what have you. Them going to Vegas and all this weird shit goes on in Vegas, and they had a few movies about it. But the one guy got tasered during that thing. Ever since then, I've really been... I just want to see what a taser feels like, is what it is. So that was me joking around and wavy. I wasn't trying to insinuate the police brutality on that level. As me legitimately saying, yeah, I'd like to get tasered. But at the same time, I don't think that they can legally taser me, right? You have to have justification. So either way, that's all said. That's what bled into everything and what have you. So that interaction had nothing to do with anything mental health history. Everything to do with the fact that with the place of employment and what have you, the heavy discrimination of the Black Hebrew Israelites and what have you, me understanding that dynamic a lot more thoroughly, understanding how in companies they push Ashkenazi, aka Orthodox Jews, to break the weekly Sabbath, and then they try to utilize that against the Black Hebrew Israelites. Well, the Orthodox Jews will work on Saturday. Why can't you? Right? Because they're trying to get everybody compliant and break that. So that's what I was asserting, because most people aren't familiar with that, and that's where a lot of racism and everything else is occurring, and the dynamic with discrimination and everything else, because we're not allowed to exercise our rights, which are constitutional, right? So if they're unalienable rights, they're allowing the companies to alienate those rights, which the companies aren't allowed legally to alienate, regardless of the Civil Rights Acts of 1964 and 1968, giving them that ability to alienate those rights if it causes undue hardship on the company. And a lot of companies will create that undue hardship on them intentionally with Six Sigma and lean manufacturing to be able to give them that authority to violate those rights. They're basically treating us like slaves, in other words, right? Which fits into that dynamic with the sovereign citizens and everything else, where people are trying to assert their rights because we're being heavily infringed upon, right? So that's the cause behind everything that happened in that interaction. But at the same time, I don't hate the police. I don't hate anybody. I just love thy neighbor as thyself. Do good to those that harm and persecute me. So when was trying to represent myself pro se in the interaction, one, it should have been dismissed almost immediately. I shouldn't have even been arrested to begin with. So the whole thing has been nothing but a shit show, right? So that said, it's like, yeah, I wouldn't take on the public defender because the public defender, he fingered me over. I told him Article 6, Section 2 of the United States Constitution. That's when he said, well, okay. He didn't want to hear anything more, but he also said, when I told him about the failure to identify that I provided my full legal name and my driver's license number, that's when he said, I think you have to actually give him your license. It's like, well, if you think I have to give him my license, then where's the law that says I actually have to give him my license? It doesn't exist, right? So that said, it's like, all right, well, that's a no bueno. And case law supports my position in that because, again, I watched enough videos and what have you, the police on TikTok and what have you, all the interactions and the sovereign citizens and everything else, substantiating the fact that you don't have to provide them with an ID or anything like that. So it's like, all right, so I know I'm within my legal right to not provide them with an ID. And again, I was trying to assert my Christian name, right? So I was asserting my rights, and asserting your rights can't be converted into a crime. That's case law. And that'll be on my website in Moavi too, free of charge. No subscriptions or anything like that. I'm not obligating. It's not like an ad website where you have all these ads flying at you and blah, blah, blah. Nope, all free of charge. I pay out of my own pocket and what have you to maintain. I update and everything else. Nobody else is updating or maintaining it and what have you. But it'll be there for your reference and for that assertion, right? So that all said, you can see where the court case went really awry and what have you. So in the recent appearance that I had, which again was unconstitutional, I wanted to proclaim that I was incompetent because I wanted to defend myself pro se. In both interactions with the Psyche Val, I asserted my rights with them. So that's conspiracy against rights on top of everything else, because they knew I had legal basis for everything. And the second one, I was asserting this, in particular, the free exercise and what have you, and gave her information that validates I was under the free exercise. But that's a conspiracy against rights, Title 18, Section 241. So when he tried to render me incompetent, which allowed him to dismiss all the charges against me, but he wasn't following the protocol under the criminal procedure on top of it. He didn't provide me with the evaluation paperwork, nor an option to file a motion for a hearing, and wanted to have me remanded. That's attempted kidnapping. Again, life in prison. So that was all information I sent basically in an email with a lot of other things, and I went through a lot of my mental health history, which I briefly encompassed in this video with them, and substantiated my position, how everything's blasphemy, if it's no victim, no crime, and everything else with the 10 Commandments. So I validated with them where they're going wrong, and how if they proceed at any point any further with trying to get the police after me or institutionalize me or anything like that, then they are committing criminal activity. It is a crime for them to proceed any further. Hence, I haven't received any notification or anything since. I'm thinking it's based on that. But likewise, 10 days after the interaction and what have you with the police, I did send emails out to the clerk on the day following saying that the police violated my rights and what have you, yada, yada. She said contact the city attorneys for their oath of office and everything else, and file a complaint with the police department if I think my rights were violated and what have you. So I took the information about the city attorneys, sent them a plea offer under the Christian aspect of things, of turning the other cheek and what have you, gave them a plea offer because I can do that, whatever. Because otherwise, I mean, that's the other aspect of the free exercise of do good to those that harm and persecute me. If I were to get a lawyer that defended me or anything like that, which I had a lot of opportunity, I do have a lot of opportunity to do that, but that would mean they would file a tort claim and they would sue for damages and sue for millions of dollars, right? Because my rights were violated. So that's not something I'm willing to do. Hence the reason why I need to defend myself pro se. Because on the other aspect of it, again, going with the 10 Commandments, if anybody's disobedient to the 10 Commandments, they're automatically children of Hashatan, the devil, in other words. And the other aspect being, why would I want a devil defending me, right? Freedom of exercise, right? So a lot of people don't understand these dynamics, and because they don't understand the dynamics, they go around making all these excuses to violate the rights of the other people, which is licentious in nature, and yet they'll try to proclaim that they're the ones that are being benevolent in the process, right? When they're not. So going back to everything with that email that I sent, which will go up to our website and every day, has all the validation, what goes through my mental health history enough to a sufficient degree to where even a psychiatrist would look at it and go, yeah, that's extremely rational. We're not going to touch this one because, especially given the fact that they could spend life in prison or even get the death penalty, that's no bueno, because the Title 18, Section 242 applies to public health care workers, as well as Title 18, Section 241, conspiracy against rights. They don't have that right to take it away from me, right? My rights are there, and they can't be taken away. That's what makes us sovereign. Under New York State Civil Rights Code, Section 2, it says supreme sovereignty is in the people. No authority under any pretense whatsoever can be exercised over the citizens without consent of the people. So in the email I said they never had my consent at any point in time. With all the charges dismissed, it's no longer coercion on that level, so my license and what have you is intact and what have you. I can't, and to try to institutionalize me, remand me in other words, would be attempted kidnapping or kidnapping if they were to actually do it. Therefore, that's life imprisonment. So that's probably why I'm not seeing any woo-woos or anything trying to take me away anywhere, because I'm well within my rights. If you assert your rights and if they're aware of what your rights are, they have no authority to come after you or to remand you or to jail you or blah, blah, blah. But the police did. So that's the point, and the purpose is to create that level of awareness in our current society. Because again, going back to Ruby Ridge, they wanted to try to claim that they're affiliated with white supremacist groups and what have you. And they're likewise Messianic Jews. So that's deprivation under the color of law. And I did cite everything with the FBI 10 days after the incident because I didn't get a response from the city attorneys. And then when I was actually, and I told them full separation of church and state and everything else in the initial complaint, Federal Division of Civil Rights is where I filed the complaint, right? And they came back with hate crimes and whatever, and interfering with religious activities and what have you. But they also, likewise, said that they couldn't interfere based on the fact that pending criminal action, criminal investigation, in other words, against me. So when I went in there on the 29th of June, and that's when which he tried to remand me and what have you, and I wasn't remanded. That's when I filed the second complaint a few days afterwards, when I received the psych eval paperwork in the when and where, in other words, for the appointments. That's when I sent an email over to the court clerk as well as the DA saying that it's unconstitutional and what have you, and that's when I also likewise filed a second complaint about the assistant DA for trying to have me remanded to the FBI and what have you, and they came back with the same thing, hate crimes, as well as interference with the religious activities, but which is criminal, a lot worse than failure to identify and a traffic citation. So that said, when the Thursday before last, I was in court and he did what he did and he put in his final order and he didn't provide me the paperwork and what have you, and I sent the email to the court clerk about blah, blah, blah. I don't have the paperwork. Want to escalate over to New York State Supreme Court, blah, blah, blah. Never got a response back. Never got the paperwork in the mail, anything like that. And then, right? So you can see where it's progressively getting worse and worse for them. So it's like, okay, well, you didn't give me anything that you should have been giving me. But here we are in this situation. So that when I got home that night from working, third complaint, the Federal Division of Civil Rights, right? Referencing both of the prior complaints that were filed and what have you, and everything in regards to, but now that the charges were dismissed against me, now they can actually, the FBI does have the authority to do their investigation because there's no pending criminal investigation against me. Now they can go and investigate. So hopefully that's what they're doing. Hopefully that's also the reason why I haven't been contacted in any regards to this, because hopefully they're actually doing their job. Because again, under Title V, Section 3331, they have oath of office to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. And that's mispression of, I forget how to pronounce the word, of treason. So if they're basically aware of a crime, in other words, where my rights were violated by any public servant and they don't act upon it to protect and defend the Constitution, they become complicit with the treasonous act, in other words, so they can be prosecuted accordingly. So they have no, that's why I think they actually might be doing an investigation. Hopefully they are. But again, under the aspect of the free exercise, which was cited in the second complaint, it's a matter of doing good to those that harm and persecute me, so they're aware of that. So even if they do the investigation, now keep in mind it's a matter of complete separation of church and state. So on my level, I have to do good, but on their level, they might prosecute. Hopefully they don't, because that's not my intent. I just want to educate them, right? I don't hate the police. I have police officers and what have you in my family, and I have dispatchers that are in my family and what have you for 911. Not looking to get anybody in trouble. I'm just trying to assert a right that I have that most Christians in modern day don't assert, based on the fact that they're not legitimately Christians and they don't understand the true dynamics of true Christianity, a matter of breaking the chains from a secular society, because we're not slaves to the system, because the government is there, again, going to the Federalist Papers, to protect our rights. That's their primary purpose. So if they're not protecting our rights and utilizing conjecture and the pretense of safety as a justification to violate our rights, so then the other aspect of it is going after, as they're trying to cite me, well, you said this about Joe Biden, that you could legally remove him from office. It's like, yeah, because if he violates, even the President of the United States can't violate the rights of the citizens. And mask and vaccine mandates was a violation of their rights, so that is grounds for impeachment and removal from office, and that's treason, right? And the same applies here, to where they're trying to utilize conjecture and what have you to mitigate my rights, and that's treason. And that's the reason why I said that to the police officers, because they were persistent in violating my rights, which is why I called 911 to report their criminal activity for violating my rights and consistently trying to push me and threaten me and coerce me into compliance, which is a violation of my rights and illegal for them to do. So when the lieutenant showed up and he refused to listen to my rights, what have you, he was complicit with that, right? So again, I don't hate them, but I was the whole time trying to educate them. Literally was. That was my intent to use the Christian name, intent to let them become familiar so they can prevent this in the state with the hate crimes, especially with all the First Amendment auditors and everything else, dealing with the videoing and everything else, right? I want to ensure that they're aware of this one, because as much as they might get alienated by everything else and the sovereign citizens and everything else, and the state nationals and everything else, causing all these complications, which is justified for them to do, I want to make sure that they're aware of the Messianic Jews as well, so that way they can say, hey, look, maybe if somebody says our rights are being violated, they'll open their ears and start listening to what's being said to them, instead of just throwing a tantrum, is what basically ended up being. They threw a tantrum because I was disrespecting them. But again, to have respect to persons is to commit sin. I'm not a state national. State nationals will say, be respectful. Sovereign citizens will say, be respectful. Me, to have respect to persons is to commit sin. I will rebuke a devil, right? Hopefully get that into their head. That way, if they ever want to, which they have done to the Hamburg division, the 12 tribes, they had CPS come in and take their children. It's like, that's illegal. And especially if I ever do get a wife and have children or what have you, I don't want the state in any capacity, especially with what happened at Ruby Ridge and what have you, thinking that they have the authority and coming after me for under any reason, killing my family, because I would not be a happy camper, right? I don't want to rinse and repeat of that situation. So it's me getting ahead of the game more than anything else, and hopefully this will elaborate everything for everybody on YouTube so you understand that dynamic. But again, I will link out my website, link out my TikTok and what have you. That way people can go to that, see the more relevant videos, and hopefully you'll get a little bit more familiarity as to what a Messianic Jew is. Because we're not here to hurt anybody. We're not a hate group that's going after the Orthodox Jews. We're not a hate group that's going after modern-day Christians. We're not a hate group that's going over against the Ishmaelites, aka Muslims. It's not a hate group that goes up against modern science or anything like that. And we're not against science. Science means knowledge. Knowledge implies fact. And biblically it says not to be ignorant. So we do rely on facts. That goes with the bearing false witness aspect of everything. So that's why we can't be ignorant. We're going to talk, and when we say something, we want to ensure that it's fact-based, right? Not conjecture, not opinion, not opinionated. So that's our context, and if you're to put it into everything that's going on in Israel right now with Hamas and the Orthodox Jews, aka Ashkenazi Jews, aka Zionists, and what have you, then you're going to understand that the Black Hebrew Israelites also might have their play in that. And because, again, it's a matter of understanding that they're colonizers, right? If you see everything that was happening on the Democrat level of things, Democrats are trying to fight that kind of war. Republicans are trying to fight that kind of war. I'm trying to create peace because Yeshua himself, blessed are the peacemakers, right? And it's a matter of being obedient to those 10 commandments exclusively, right? That's what instills trust in everybody, is not abiding by secular law and secular protocol. Just following Yahweh, being completely obedient to him, religious freedom, right? And in that way, and not utilizing any force, nonviolence, right? Turn the other cheek, do good to those that harm and persecute us. Hopefully I can help educate people in those zones as well, like a lot of other Messianic Jews have, because Messianic Jews are recognized in the state of Israel as well. Granted, they want to proclaim it as more being a matter of heredity still, so they don't understand Romans 2 to where it's not a matter of heredity yet, but it's progress. We're working on it slowly but surely. Hopefully we'll mitigate world wars and what have you, but at the same time, if you understand the dynamics like I do, if you watch the video about the Hebrew calendar and all the holy days and what have you, you understand the age of men is limited to 120 years, and a season biblically is the 50th year Jubilee, so that's 120 times 50 is the year 6,000. And based on what I'm working on still, if you go to my website, I'm trying to validate that biblically, the current year of the world and what have you, which correlates to the 7th year Sabbath of the land and obviously 50th year Jubilee. And also you'd understand when the year 6,000 is, because even though it states biblically that people aren't going to know the exact time or place, we can know the exact year. It's going to be the year 6,000. Hopefully I can document that before I die, because I don't think that Revelations is going to be in complete swing. The year 6,000 is going to be before I die. I'm going to die before the year 6,000, but you're only talking about maybe a few more generations before the year 6,000 hits, maybe 170 to 180 years from what I gather from an online source. So I'm in process of validating that, but not too much longer. So the kingdom of Elohim is at hand. Repent while you can. Shalom.